And so here we are, ready to take our place on the world stage as an equal among the other sovereign nations of the earth. There is a problem with this, however. The United States was essentially the world's ugly duckling. We were the nation that few wanted anything to do with, let alone be our friends and allies. Okay? We're ready to step out. We're ready to be seen as a sovereign nation in our own right, the equal to Britain or Spain or France or anything, but it ain't going to work that way. Britain, believe it or not, still refused to repeal the navigation laws. Okay, they were still trying to impose these same navigation laws, which had been around since the late 1600s. Okay, this had worked so well during the colonial period, they decided to keep pushing afterwards. And you think about it, here you have one sovereign nation, Britain, trying to enforce their laws on America, a separate sovereign nation. And so as a result, you're starting to see more and more people getting more and more fed up with Britain. Now, we already, remember, had lost the Loyalists. Okay, the Loyalists were essentially gone at this point in time. So you had the Patriots as the primary voice of government and the people, and they were starting to push for more heat to be placed on Britain. So Britain is going through, they're trying to keep the navigation laws enforced. Okay, it's not working so well. Remember how well it worked against US smuggling and stuff like that. And so it closes down all trade with the US, and they figure that this is the way to bring the US into line. Now, there is the argument to be made that essentially we're going through thinking that they could essentially crush us at that point in time, or that the United States would fracture. We would end up with a bunch of small little independent nations essentially that Britain could start to gobble back up. And so you had this issue of trade, and they wouldn't do anything. Britain also at this time, they tried to annex Vermont. Now, we don't think of Vermont as the source of international tension, but it was at this time. They were trying to annex it with the help of the Allen brothers. Plus, Britain continued to hold a chain of military posts on U.S. soil, especially like Detroit, for example. You think about it, it is a nation with whom we've just been at war, still having ground forces within the nation and having forts within the nation. They're still on U.S. soil. Now, granted, this is part of the Ohio country that we were talking about previously, and so it is out on the quote-unquote frontier, but at the same time, you still have those boots on the ground. Now, one excuse that they used was that, well, Britain didn't really want to have to leave soldiers here, but they kind of had to. They were there to make sure that the U.S. honored its part of the treaty, and what's more, to pay back debts to loyalists. Now, if you remember, we talked previously about the fact that loyalist property was seized, that none of the loyalists were executed following the revolution, but their stuff was taken. And there was the promise of payment from the government to make up for their lost property. Now, Britain, using this essentially just as an excuse to stay on, to try and stir up trouble, to cause issues for the United States. They're just going to stay there for as long as possible. They just wanted to use all of this as an excuse. But it wasn't just England. England wasn't the only nation that was essentially looking down her nose at the ugly duckling. You also had Spain. Now, Spain had been at war with England during the Revolution, much as France and Holland had, but at the same time, they were no fan of the new American Republic. So in 1784, Spain closes the Mississippi to American commerce. The Mississippi River is now closed. Now, you got to understand, the Mississippi, any river at this point in time, these were the highways within a nation, okay? This was how you got goods downstream in a very quick manner. Now, the Mississippi, for example, this is how the folks out in the Ohio country and the folks on the frontier would get their crops to market. You'd build a barge or a raft of some kind, you'd load up all the stuff you wanted to sell, you then could get in the river, float all the way down to New Orleans, where then it could be loaded on ships that would take it wherever. But if you couldn't get there, if you couldn't actually use the city of New Orleans, the port there, to sell your goods, well, then there was no point. I mean, you come down the Mississippi River by flatboat or raft or something like that. You walked home. I mean, there was no way to go back upstream except walking along the bank. And so Spain saw this as the ability to put a stranglehold on the West, that they would be able, much like we were talking about with Britain, maybe they could pick up some pieces. So they closed the Mississippi River to American commerce, and that's going to have a huge impact on what the farmers can actually sell. So this is going to wreak havoc on the economy of the United States, especially the country. But that wasn't all. Spain was also claiming a large area near the Gulf of Mexico. Now, this is land. Today it would be part of Georgia and Mississippi. And it was ceded to the U.S. by Great Britain, but Spain is claiming this. This is just north of the Gulf of Mexico. So think where the Florida Panhandle is, that general area. So this is now a disputed territory between Spain and the United States. So that's going to cause problems. Okay, they've closed the river. They are disputing the territory and whatnot. In fact, at the city of Natchez in present-day Mississippi, it had a fort. So the British have forts on American soil. Spain has forts on American soil. And really, there's not a whole lot we can do about it. If you recall the Revolution, yeah, we didn't have the ability to beat Britain on our own. We needed the help of France and Spain and Holland and, everybody. And so as a result, if they're doing this now, we have to try and figure out what to do. But that's not all. It's not just that these two nations have boots on the ground on American soil. No, Spain and England are both encouraging Indian tribes to restlessness. They are trying to stir up trouble so that the Indian tribes are going after the various settlements and things like that because they know that the U.S. will not be able to do much about it. Remember, after the Revolution, we do not have a strong central government. The Articles of Confederation were designed to make sure that the states were strong, but the national government was weak. So if you have an attack somewhere, the other states are under no real obligation to send troops to help. It's not like there is one cohesive military that they could send anywhere that they needed to. So you've got the British forts, you've got the Spanish forts, you've got the Indian tribes, you've got all these different issues coming up. Spain and Britain are not attacking U.S. settlements or anything like that directly, but they are going through and they're causing others to do it on their behalf. Today it would be referred to as a proxy war, that you're using other people to fight your war for you. Now, at least we've got France, right? I mean, France was our only real ally during the war. They actually sent troops and ships and everything like that. So we've got them, right? Not really. Okay, France is now demanding we pay back everything we owe them. So we have Britain, Spain, France. Everybody is essentially giving us grief at this point in time, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. And this is just physically here on American soil, okay? Globally, remember, New England, for example, was very big on shipping, okay? The South was agricultural, North was shipping, okay? So you have these ships filled with American sailors, okay? This is the merchant marine, okay? We're not talking Navy or anything like that, but we are talking about the guys who are actually, shipping things to and from the United States. So while we've got all this going on with Britain, Spain, and France, now let's add into it problems on the high seas. In North Africa, you have pirate states. Okay, they're the pirates of North Africa, basically. You had, for example, the Dey of Algiers. Okay, this is the guy in charge in present day, what would be today Algiers. They go through and they're ravaging U.S. ships in the area. Okay, they are attacking U.S. merchant ships, unarmed merchant ships. They're stealing the cargo and they're putting into slavery the sailors on the boats. Now, this is a source of humiliation. This is a source of economic disruption. This is a big problem for the U.S. But we're just too weak to do anything about it. We are at a point now where we have enemies all around the world. We have those who don't like us all around the world. And yet we can't do anything. The Articles of Confederation had things set up so that you did have strong states that would be able to maintain their independence. But at what cost? We're at a point now where we have pirates seizing our shipping and enslaving our people, and all we can do is quite literally stand by.